Hi, I'm Chappington, and welcome back to Skrælige. This is chapter 16, the final chapter, because we are going to end this just before City Skylines 2 comes out. Right here, we're starting with the Middleton Quarry Railway, and doing kind of the initial path here. I'm glad that the topographic lines are back in City Skylines 2, because they would not be able to do this without them. And then here, you go ahead and basically just redo half of the alignment, because it looks like it's going to be, while that was like a better slope, trying to fit in where the buildings are going to go is kind of tricky. The original plan was to get this chapter out earlier, but the whole having a long vacation and then having the kids over summer break and then 3 days of kindergarten and my 3.5-year streak of not getting COVID came to an end. So it's been a few months. It's been interesting. We'll still have one more video that'll just be the overview of like 800 years. Pretty insane if you ask me. The first bit of this is just more industrial expansion, some industrial housing to go with it. We move on to the other side of the Sigwan River to Havant. And here, in fact, most of this video is going to be just a lot of residential expansion, which kind of gets to part of the reason why, even if it weren't for City Skylines 2, well, if it weren't for City Skylines 2, this probably would have continued, but I would have had to do something to change the scope, because plopping buildings individually, when you also have to go back and update things over time, does not scale well. But you see here how there's some parts where I just fill it in with these different New England townhouses that look a little bit more modern, and so there's a lot of blocks where it's just kind of just cookie cutter. In fact, in some places it's literally copy paste this square block setup. And then there's other parts where, because those are the residential ones, are not as many good commercial buildings that fit. So like there's a few cases where it looks like I'm placing a building that's definitely older than you would think for the time period. Because it's by the riverside, there's definitely going to be some industrial expansion there. I've tried to pick out the more interesting bits that, at least a little bit different, kind of show the gist of what's happening without showing literally everything. I definitely have had the habit here where I think, oh, well, everything is important. And then you get like 30, 40, 50 minutes even when you put stuff at 10 speed. So this time I'm cutting a lot of stuff out. And then Havant is finally getting more like of a well-defined riverside there, getting some more industrial docks. Lining these up is always tricky because since they're relative to the terrain, you just move them a little bit and then, oh, now you gotta line up in the Z-axis too, and it's so much fun. Also have to kind of revamp the dock area here. You can see the ferry I have set up is nowhere near sufficient based on that huge crowd waiting. Next we swing back over to Middleton, but this time Middleton proper. This town is going to get a lot of renovation, but finally replacing that old wooden bridge. The kind of like the point there where it's more built up, kind of like the old town, the downtown, that we're going to get, again, well-defined riverside with some nice docks, especially because it is at the fork of those two rivers. Like it makes sense to have that become more of a commercial area. Yeah, so here we finally start clearing this out, adding some landfill. Now the new industrial buildings coming in. Clear up a lot of dirt there too. And now comes the part where we try to squeeze in some new roads. We'll just kind of backfill this area. And we start looking into putting some of these vanilla industrial buildings, because especially that, I think it was like the one of the early patches that introduced European buildings, and like the European industrial ones are kind of perfect. Well, not perfect, but they work really well for this. You do have to go in and remove like the electronic signs and stuff, but otherwise they work pretty well. Once the the central downtown part of Middleton is done. Now it's time to start taking over some farmland, subdividing that land, and making these new blocks. Kind of like trying to get a bit of a grid, but like a grid kind of adapts to the roads that are already there, and to a lesser extent the farmland. I also had a second bridge. Setting up the grid here definitely has a lot of Manhattan vibes, and it looks a little bit more orderly than Lower Manhattan, but obviously not as orderly as when they actually got like the full grid set up to the north. And then I start a lot of the new expansions kind of had this similar architectural style, because that's one of the things, at least like I've kind of picked up on, that like a lot of places when they do, so like a lot of the time with these sorts of cities, there'll be like a big expansion in the 19th century, and that expansion is usually pretty similar architecture, just kind of copy and pasted, and there'll be like infill if there's been like a fire or something, or just the building's just been demolished for whatever reason. But when they're built, they tend to be very homogeneous, and then get a little more diverse as time goes by. And finishing up on the south side of the river, we are filling it, we're expanding that a bit. Still using the Skrælige colonial houses there though. They don't get the fancy pants buildings apparently. The next major town we move on to is Newhope, where kind of you have like the old original settlement, and it's kind of stretched down the coast a bit to where the fort is, and where the shipyard is. And so now we're going in and starting, in this chapter we don't quite finish it, and since this is the last chapter we're never going to finish it, but it will eventually fill in this whole hill. That was kind of the original plan. And that was probably going to be like some sort of military academy or something at the top of the hill. One of the things is, with this many blocks to fill in these last few changes, basically been close to doubling the population. And so because of that, there's been a lot of just whole new blocks to fill in. The sort of thing that like zoning would be a lot more helpful for. And I think if I were continuing this longer, I'd probably just try to figure out some way to get zoning to work nicely, especially when you're doing wall-to-wall buildings. The whole square grid on not square roads doesn't really work out so well. And definitely like for single family, like it's fine. And when you're doing like high-density buildings that aren't necessarily connected, it also works fine. So like the original buildings in vanilla city skylines totally work fine with the way the grid's set up. But when they need to connect to each other, unless you actually like have something programmed in to form the buildings, then it's going to look a little bit weird on the corners and diagonals. So that's kind of the tricky part to deal with here, but I've just been experimenting with a lot of different patterns here. I think most of them work, some of them look a little out of place in the context, but it was worth a try. The next town we're looking at is Northstead. By this point, the pattern we're going through is pretty straightforward. They kind of expand the grid based on what exists already, pretty much only Skrælingborough and Havant have a rigid road setup. The rest of them are kind of just expanding outward, but trying to have somewhat of a grid. But yeah, so the pattern is like taking over some farm fields nearby, dragging out the roads to continue the grid, making some more industrial along the riverfront, and then those farms that we took over once the grids are done, maybe it's industrial, but a lot of it is just more residences, more city blocks with houses wall to wall, and it's a lot of copy and paste. So ultimately, we'll see how much I end up cutting out and how much you'll see. It'll still probably be very repetitive, but that's an accurate representation of what I did. Just a lot of this over and over again. We end up going up to Ragnarsson here, and this is interesting because it kind of started as like a faraway town that was kind of not a rebellion, but kind of getting away from everyone else. But now, at this time, the Industrial Revolution is starting, and one of the things that comes out of that, or more accurately, comes out of labor unions fighting for it, more people start to get time for leisure. As before, like if you're just subsistence farming, like that's your life. That's all your time right there. And so this is roughly when the idea of like going to the sea or going to the beach, where that starts to become a thing. I think it probably happens a little bit later because we're still kind of working in like the 1820s up to 1836. I mean, if I wanted to, I could make a Victoria 3 mod, because, you know, I love to come up with ideas for way more projects than I could possibly actually implement. And we pop down to Vitathorpe here. Vitathorpe and Ragnarsson start to also become homes for like resorts. So some of the fancy... So I know that like there was the hotels pack that came out as the last DLC, but this was like that historical buildings pack, which is just the perfect architecture for here. Also in real life, this Stefnabjarg village was the last thing I did. I put this earlier on. A small village that's kind of probably tripled in size, honestly, with the density of the new buildings. We also pop up to New Jorvik for kind of the same thing, although it's merely double in this case. in West Abenakiborough, where we had built the dam and the locks recently, and expand the residential area there a bit. And then finally at the end here, we have Skrælingborough. So expanding the industrial area. It's all the same steps that we've been doing in all the other towns, just much bigger scale because it is the capital city that has like, I don't think it's quite half the population, but well, we try to come up with something that kind of recognizes this big hexagon shape that's forming. Oh, well, not really a hexagon so much as it's half of an octagon. But drawing out some like big blocks and then subdividing them into normal sized blocks. And then just a lot of copy and pasting residential buildings. But the neat thing here is this is a lot of those like temporary houses that popped up because of the fire that happened during the War of 1812. And now about like, I don't know, half to 2/3 of those buildings get knocked down and like nicer houses are getting added in here. But crucially not all of the small, basically shacks are knocked down. So we're gonna actually get an interesting mix here. So I kind of just have to go to all of the buildings where the am shacks were built and demolish most of them, add these American townhouses. And we get like a nice little urban area built, like a little urban neighborhood built up. And so that basically is like, the rest of this is just a combination of whole new blocks and filling in the Amshack blocks. So I'll kind of just sign off for now and keep watching that with some music, and I'll be back. As I said at the beginning of the chapter, this is going to be the last chapter of Skrælige. There's one more video that I want to squeeze in before City Skylines 2 actually comes out. I had originally been considering starting a new series then. Probably not going to, just because, well, one, when it comes out, it's going to take a bit for like the modding community to mature there. I was like considering, I might still do this. I've been thinking about like putting together some sort of historical progression mod. The idea being that like you can mess around, because there is a mod you can like mess around with the year that it shows in the bottom left corner, because I think we're in like 2057, 2058. But you can mess with that figure. So if City Skylines 2 modding is similar enough, which I don't see why it would be radically different, but we'll see. The idea would be, make it so that different buildings don't spawn, or different vehicles don't spawn or spawn based on the year. That's definitely something that could be done in City Skylines 1. My assumption is it would be doable. That was a thing I was considering, but again, I talk about all this stuff that would be neat, but there's not enough time to do all of it. But then the other thing I'm looking into is completely different. I'm doing some independent game development. We'll see if, as a hobby now, we'll see if that actually, I don't know, it could actually become something like an actual serious thing. So rather sink my time into that than making these videos. That does mean there will be more videos here probably, but it won't be City Skylines, probably. Maybe. I don't actually know. But yeah, so we'll do the final before and after, and then that will be it for Skrælige. Thanks for following along. This has definitely been the longest I've ever spent on a single city, and it's been really neat to take this through 800 years of history. Kind of not something that's easy to do in City Skylines, but yeah, it's been quite a project. And even though it got definitely pretty tedious towards the end, I'm really happy with how it turned out. So thanks for watching, and take care.